Yep. Yeah. Right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming to Redwood City Library, spending your beautiful Sunday with us here today to learn about, although I think many of you already know, the harms that the transgender agenda is perpetrating on women and girls and families as a whole. So in 2021, my daughter came out as, she identified as a transgender boy. And I was lost. I had nowhere to turn. I didn't know anything about this whole transgender movement that was underfoot. And when I finally got my bearings, I looked around and I said, where are the white knights? Where are the people that are fighting against this? Where do I join? How do I speak? How do I get involved? Because I don't want anybody to ever go through what my family went through. And I had a very happy ending. My daughter, after a year and a half of believing that she was a boy, grew to be comfortable in her natural body. And now she's an adult and she's stunningly beautiful with all her body parts intact, and grateful that I didn't fall for the transgender dialogue and agenda. But on my travels, the first place I landed is I joined a group called Sovereign Women, and that was up in Oregon, Seattle, Washington. And I met Amy Sousa, and she was one of those lights saying, this is what we're going to do to safeguard women and children. So Amy actually was very instrumental in getting me started and getting me strong enough to speak out. Amy has a master's in psychology. She's a lecturer. She's an educator, and I call her friend. So take it away, Amy.
Thank you so much, Erin. All right, well, thank you all so much for being here today. What I am going to be showing you is a very small portion of a 3-hour parent safeguarding webinar that I have put together, and I actually am also doing the whole webinar on June 20th. And this is a small excerpt. This is work that I have been compiling. I have been speaking out on this issue for over 10 years. I do come from a background in depth psychology. I also come from a background in radical feminism and safeguarding women and children. I do boundary workshops with women, intuition building, self-trust, listening to our instincts, and developing internal authority. Today, I am going to be talking a little bit about language and language acquisition. This ideology, and I should say when I am talking about transgenderism, I'm always talking about an ideology. I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about what this ideology does. When I am talking about behavior, I'm talking about behavior. Again, it's not about the identities of people that I'm talking about the behavior of people. So I want to keep those two things distinguished. This is an ideology and it impacts people's behavior. I'm always coming from the position of, as I said, safeguarding intuition, instincts, and boundaries. And this ideology creates a loophole in language. Men are only women in language. That is the only place where men can be women. So language is the battlefield. This is a battle of language. This is a manipulation that has been introduced into our culture linguistically. 20 years ago, when the rest of us were growing up, we might see a man in a dress and we could easily say, that's a man in a dress. But somehow, transgender ideology has introduced the notion that when you see the man in a dress, you are not allowed to say, that is a man in a dress. You are meant to look at him and see that is magically a trans woman. So language is the battlefield. And I am always talking about children's ability to name and claim Those of you who are parents will have seen your very little ones go through a language acquisition phase. It is a really funny phase. They get things wrong, they get things right. But ultimately, when they are coming to you and they are saying, Mommy, that's a bird. And you say, yeah, that's a bird. And they say, Daddy, that's a truck. And you say, yeah, that is a truck. That is not just a process of language acquisition. That is a process of naming and claiming. That is a process of internal authority building. That is a process where they are learning, I can trust my body to tell me the truth about the world. I can trust my body to keep me safe. So, epistemic trust. What is that? That is trusting the process of knowing itself. A child's growing confidence that what they see, what they perceive through their sense perceptions, what they feel, what they notice can be relied upon. They can perceive reality, make distinctions. Their observations have meaning, and the people that they recognize, people trust that they can recognize what they recognize. And that their experience of the world is real. I need my glasses now. So every successful act of naming is simultaneously an act of authority building. So they are learning that they can trust the signals of their own body to keep them safe in the world. And this is how we are born. Before we are thinking beings, we're sensing beings. So this ideology is sort of the latest iteration of a misconception of Cartesian duality. I think, therefore I am. I think I am, oh, therefore I am. But in reality, before cognitive, abstract, rational thinking, we are born sensing beings, and our body is primary. It is the primary safeguarding tool that we are all born with. Before a child can think, I am a child is already a sensing being. Those of you who are mothers will know, as soon as your infant arrives in the world, what can they do? They can already root towards the breast. And as much as they are able to move, they can flinch away from pain, moving towards that which is nourishing and away from pain, pleasure. That is the most primal instinct we have, to move that towards that which is nourishing and away from that which is pain. So that embodied sense, that is our most primal, the oldest safeguarding system that we have. That is that lizard and pattern recognition amygdala part of our brain, and it is instantaneous compared to our logical, sequential, rational thinking. So this is what we have to keep us safe. Anyone who is telling you that humans have evolved past our instincts, they are going to try to hijack your instincts. And anyone who is telling you that is advertising something to you or selling you something. The food industry doesn't want us to pay attention to our instincts for satiation. There are all kinds of industries that want to co-opt our instincts and hijack them. So they want to pretend those instincts are not important and don't exist. So when children are doing an accurate name and claim, yeah, that's a dog, and the mom says, yes, that's a dog, they are learning to align themselves to a stable sense of self and reality. And that is why the affirmation, when they get it right, that getting it right part that we tell them when they say that's a bird, and you say, yes, I'm affirming you, you're getting it right. That is a feedback system that is helping them trust themselves. So the child who says, that man is angry, and you say, yeah, he does look angry, they learn to trust their perception. Or the child who says, I don't want to hug that person, and you tell the adult says, okay, you don't have to. They are learning to trust their body's signals. The child is building an internal reference point, and a danger happens when adults undermine that process. So when an adult, for example, who is a man says, call me a woman, and the child says, that's a man, and the adult says, no, you are not allowed to trust the signals of your body. You have to look at that man and you are supposed to call him a woman. And if you listen to the signals of your body, you're a bigot. So this is the study that is at the root of my presentation. Is milk bigger than water? This is a study done by Johns Hopkins University, and they found that children will offer an answer if there is an answer to be given, rather than having the ability to discern that the question in itself is absurd. So this was done for court testimony. This is why this whole study was done. And they found asking kids questions like, is milk bigger than water? Or which is heavier, red or yellow? That the kids don't know how to say, that's absurd. How could red or yellow be measured in weight? That's a ridiculous question. I toss out the absurdity of your question. But because an authority figure is asking them the question, they believe that there must be a right answer to that question. And so say the child says, yellow is heavier than red. And the adult says, oh, so you're telling me you think yellow is heavier than red? You think yellow is heavier than red? They will perceive that you are questioning them and they'll say, no, red is heavier. Obviously, red is heavier than yellow. So when they are further questioned, they will again change their answers depending on the adult. And of course, this is because kids know that they are vulnerable and they know that they have to rely on the adults in the room to keep them safe. So at the same time that they're learning to trust their body to keep them safe, they are also reliant on the adults in the room to help them learn how to trust their body, because they're also, of course, reliant on adults. Now, safeguarding expert Gavin DeBecker talks about this in his seminal work, The Gift of Fear. He talks about the intuition. The whole book, The Gift of Fear, and learning to keep yourself safe in the world is really a process of learning to trust your intuition. And the root of that word, intuition, is to protect, to guard, to wear, to protect, to guard. That is the root of that word. Now, every other animal in the animal kingdom is teaching their young to hone and heighten their instincts. That's what the other animals in the animal kingdom do. They teach their young, if they're predators, they teach their young to be better predators. If they're prey animal, they teach their young to be better at hiding. They teach them to hone in and heighten those instincts for self-protection. They do not introduce confusion. They do not manipulate their kids or punish them for saying accurate things that they see in the world. So, adults who are telling kids, you are bigoted for listening to your body. You cannot listen to your body. Well, now that child has to make a choice. Am I supposed to listen to my body to keep me safe? Or am I supposed to listen to the adult who also I have to rely on to keep me safe? So this causes a major conflict for a child, because now there are two different things that they are trying to listen to. So this child who is told they are bigoted for listening to themselves, they are learning that when my instincts conflict with authority, then authority wins. They start to learn that reality is determined by those who have power. They stop listening to themselves. They stop trusting their own bodies, and they become dependent on that external authority. So this creates a split where the body, their own instincts, their own feelings, their own sense perceptions becomes something not to listen to, not a source of trust, not a source of authority, but something to manage, to discipline, to suppress, and to overcome. Healthy development requires reality testing. It requires them being able to live in a world where there is consensus reality that is based on material physical facts. Children need help learning this information. They do not need confusion. One way to think about how embodiment develops is for them to have consensus reality, that what I feel is real, even if other people feel it differently. That is what kids need to understand, that even if someone else sees it differently, what I feel is real, what I see is real. Disembodiment, dissociation is saying that what others say is real, even when it contradicts my body. So this is a dissociated child, a child who cannot trust themselves. So, all right. There is a study, this is a story, rather. This is by a woman who was a major activist. She ended up writing this article. Oh, okay. I'm gonna wrap this up. Ultimately, this woman led her child down the path. She was an activist in this ideology. She fought for transgender ideology. She fought for quote unquote transgender rights, but she continued to question her child. Are you a girl? Are you a boy? Are you a girl? Are you a boy? She had a son. She would not answer the question for him. And he began to ask her repeatedly, am I a boy or a girl? Am I a boy or a girl? She would not give a firm answer until finally one day he lighted on, I guess I am a girl, and got huge applause from the family. And he was settled in. She realized later that he finally had something to cling to. When she affirmed that he was a girl, finally he didn't have a conflict over his identity and the authority, and he clung to it. Of course, years later, she realized she had led him down this path. She had walked him down this path. She had introduced confusion by offering these questions to him. She had created a confusion in her own child. He later went on to apply to her to detransition and is now detransitioned. All right. There is a lot I can say, and I think I came a little over-prepared. So I am just going to skip to the last thing that I want to land on. I want to land on the 16th century tale of Little Red Riding Hood. This is a classic tale. It is a tale of a little girl seeing a wolf. Okay, she sees this wolf. Her problem is not that she doesn't see. Her problem is not that her instincts aren't functioning. She sees the big eyes. She sees the big ears. She sees the big teeth. That is not her problem. Her instincts are functioning properly. Her problem is that she gets talked out of responding to those instincts. It is a conflict between the authority and her own senses, and she learns a very tough lesson. There is a second part of that story. There is a sequel that is not often spoken about. And that sequel to that story is in the second version. There's a sequel in the Grimm version. There's a second little part, an addendum. And we are told that she meets another wolf. And that this time, instead of entertaining him and his confusions and his manipulations, she sets a pot of boiling water with her grandmother under the fire. The wolf falls in and she eats him. They eat him up. Psychologically, what they are telling us with this story is that we must digest this lesson. Children need to digest the lesson that it is more important to listen to their own instincts and direct sense perceptions than be persuaded by charming authority. And I'm just going to land here. If you want to learn more, come to me. Yes.
Just while we're transferring slides, We have time for one question. We might have time for many questions later, but if there's one question from the audience, we'd like to ask Amy, Sousa, while we're switching slides.
So fascinating what you said about identity creation. And the fact that there's so many kids who are trans who have autism. Have you done much studies on that and their inability, whatever they call that, they have a difficulty with identity formation?
There's a lot about different ages that identity forms, and of course, identity is entirely self-created. The webinar that I have has a massive critique of gender dysphoria itself, and that is one thing I would like to say. There is no such thing as gender dysphoria. There is only social indoctrination. Gender dysphoria is a diagnosis that reinforces social indoctrination. No such thing exists. No one is ROGD. There is only social indoctrination. But yes, identity formation is hard, especially for artistic kids, and they are looking for a way to fit in. Now, identity is entirely fluid. It is a self-created concept that we make up about ourselves. It is a story that is always changing. And people can have negative stories. Some people think I am a loser. Or of course, there's famously a group of young men online who believe we are incels. Identity can cause this discomfort because it is a story that you make up about yourself, and identity formation is challenging. That is why puberty is challenging. All of the stages of will building and authority building, the terrible twos, are challenging. Anytime that you are gaining authority and trying to create more identity, that is going to be a challenging process. So kids who have an especially hard time with it are looking for a solid, clear space to land. So an autistic child is looking for that solid place. So you can land there. Well, my identity is, I'm a trans girl. Done. I'm solid, done. No more thinking about it. Whereas as someone else, like who here has a set identity? Identity is always changing. You know, at one point in my life, I was like, I'm an artist, you know, I'm a writer, I'm a this, I'm a that. Identity is constantly changing. And it's uncomfortable, especially who's been fired and lost their job. Or maybe you lost a child or a parent. Lost a career, you lose something that is your core identity, that is gonna cause pain. No one likes that. But there is no fixed identity. And that's why the original role of analysis was to let go of any narrow, fixed, rigid, egoic identity attachment. That's what Freud and Jung were talking about, that the wholeness of the self is far greater than any one little ego identity construct. These constructs are brittle and rigid. They can't save you from anything. Identity is much bigger than that. Our self is much bigger than that.
Thank you so much, Amy. I'm going to introduce to you Jane Burns. Unfortunately, Lierre Keith had an accident and she was unable to come, but we have, she's okay. I mean, she's fine. She just really tweaked her back, and a long car ride was going to just make it worse. So I apologize that she's not here, but we have Jane Burns, who's going to talk about men and women's prisons.
So thank you all for coming, and I want to speak to, hopefully there's some people in the room here that disagree with me, because I rarely get to talk to you. I welcome your questions. I really want to have a dialogue. So ask me some hard questions. I've worked with incarcerated folks for 6 to 7 years now. I care deeply about the population, irrespective of the issue of men and women's prisons. This was an issue that came after I started working with the incarcerated population. So please, I welcome you, and please ask me some questions. I think the only way we can achieve understanding is by having those hard conversations. Okay, so the nightmare reality of men in women's prisons. I'm going to skip, there's one empty slide here. I'm going to say that I'm not going to talk about my feelings today or my opinions. I'm going to use publicly available records in the state of California's own records to talk about what's happening in men and women's prisons. I'm going to use the voices of incarcerated women directly. I will even be using the voices of incarcerated trans prisoners directly, okay? People who disagree with this, but they are part of the trans community. I will also be talking about my knowledge of the prisons a little bit, but I will not be putting in my feelings or my opinions. So in 2021, California passed SB 132, which allows men to self-identify into California women's state prison. What's not required is any form of hormones, any form of surgery, any psychiatric evaluation. I don't believe men can become women if they are doing these things, but I want you to know there are just very few guardrails on which men can self-identify into women's prisons. And the law is written, it cannot be denied for having a penis. So if you have a penis, you can still come into women's prison. You cannot be denied for being heterosexual, being attracted to women. You can't be denied access to the women's prison. And then I want to talk about this last one, a factor present among other people incarcerated at that prison. It's a little bit complicated. So I want to talk using California's own records, the Office of Inspector General, which oversees the state prisons, explained what that meant. If a man with a history of raping women asked to transfer and other women at that prison have any sort of sexual offense convictions, this doesn't have to be forcible rape. This could be assisting a man in raping or any other type of, porn, something like, child porn, something like that. Then the state may be barred from using his record of raping women to deny him access to the women's prison. So we have, from the state of California ourselves, knowledge that they do not limit male rapists from entering California women's prisons. So how big a problem is this? Well, as of March 2026, because they have to release this data every couple of months, California says 1,028 men have requested access to women's prisons. These are just already convicted, incarcerated men asking for access to California state prisons. We have no knowledge of how many men are coming in directly off the street. So if you already identify as a woman, you will be placed in the women's prison, and we have no way of finding that out. However, if you are convicted and then you decide later that you're a woman, we have that knowledge, and that's 1,000. Now, only 47, quote, have been approved so far, which sounds like a small number. I'm going to talk about that later. But CDCR, California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, which oversees this process, knows that it would be insane to put 1,000 men in these prisons. So they're dragging their heels. They haven't denied a lot of those applications. There's hundreds of applications pending because they have no way to deny them. So they're in this sort of holding cell, pending applications while CDCR tries to deal with this nightmare. And I'll talk a little bit about the impact of these 47 men. 12 of them have transferred back, some forcibly and some voluntarily. This is sort of the situation. And now I want to give you perspective on what this 1,000 means in terms of the number of people in prison. So I'm a math teacher, so I got to go to the math here. Incarcerated women are a very small, vulnerable population inside of the incarcerated system here in the state of California. 85,000 men are incarcerated in state prisons. It's not even 4,000, about 4,000 women. So 95% of the incarcerated population is male. So if you take even a small, just think about that. If you just take a small part of that black bar and put it in the red bar, you now have you have like a lot of men in there. In fact, if all 1,000 men got their way and got to go into women's prison would be 20% men. These are men in locked cells with women. If you're a woman, I can't imagine a bigger nightmare than being in a locked cell with a convicted male felon, and there's no one to hear you or help you if something happens overnight, because they do lock the cells at night and no one comes to help you. So you're in there with that guy alone. And I want to point out that one man could easily dominate an entire housing wing of 50 to 60 women. It just takes one, and it's the same with the men in women's sports or boys and girls sports. It just takes one boy to impact hundreds of thousands of girls. So let me give you sort of a perspective of this from the incarcerated women. They basically say they have two choices. Every woman who has a man come into her housing wing has a choice. Appease the man, oppose the man. A lot choose appease because they don't want to be forcibly raped. So they cook for him, they clean for him, they submit sexually for him. A lot of women have been in domestic violence situations. They don't know they have agency. They think it is easier, safer to just do something he wants to do and not have to deal with the possible black eyes and broken ribs, things like that, which have happened. And then there's the ones that oppose, and then the options are kind of form a pack, and this is in the state records, the Office of Inspector General's report from August 2023. I highly recommend anyone read it if they doubt me. The Office of Inspector General has records of women forming packs and sleeping in shifts. The rooms at CCWF are in pods of 8. So like 4 or 5 women can sleep at a time, and then you have 1 or 2 women awake while watching the men. So see how much harder this is though, right? Like if you make up some ramen, you can sleep through the night. So those are the choices that women face. Even some of the men that were initially excited about this law have transferred back. So that is interesting. They transferred back voluntarily. Tiffany Tooks, who was profiled by the LA Times as being this amazing model, trans woman, transition, very much was eager to get in with the women's prison. He saw the rapes, he saw the harassment of the women, and he couldn't stand it. He actually transferred back. He said, men should not be here. And he left on his own accord. So look up Tiffany Tooks, profiled by the LA Times. You can see even trans-identified men are saying, hey, something wrong is happening here with this law. This law has been used by very, very deviant men to get into the women's prison. So who are the men inside California state prisons? I'm just going to show you a few real quickly because we have a time limit. If you're interested in learning more, we can talk more about them. But here are a few. Here's Sean. Sean, what's the fun? I would love to hear someone justify why this person should be in a women's prison. He's convicted of forcing 2 little boys, 6 and 8, to have oral sex with him. He has not taken hormones. He's not transitioned in any way. He is currently living with a woman who he considers his girlfriend in a cell. And he has video calls with her children. So that's what's going on with that. That's Sean. Just imagine being in a locked cell with him. Here's Richard Maxbrush. He tortured a mother and daughter with electric shocks, brutally raping the daughter both vaginally and anally, and then later asked to work as an electrician in the women's prison. Richard. Why is he a woman? Here's Jason Michael Hahn. He's convicted of killing multiple children. He's called a Tupperware baby killer. I don't know if there's any children in the audience, but anyway, he did kill a baby and put the baby in Tupperware. He is now currently in CCWF, California. And these are all publicly available records. You can look this up on the California Inmate Locator website. So you don't have to trust me on that. This is Michael Contreras. He's a gang member, violent gang member, Florence 13. He's had multiple killings, including one in custody. So when he was in the men's prison, he killed somebody. And that's a huge red flag because if somebody's done that, they're never getting out of prison. They have nothing to lose. They've already killed somebody in prison. So he's extremely dangerous. He's been known to beat women. He gets in a lot of sexual relationships with women in the prison. He's impregnated women. Dana Rivers. Dana Rivers was a nationally known trans activist. He brutally murdered 2 Black lesbians in Oakland and stabbing one 40 times, 26 times in the face, also gunned down their child. This was all in their home while they were sleeping. He put on one of the woman's clothes and then tried to steal her motorcycle. He was caught right outside the house. And finally, I just want to spend a little time on Tremaine Carroll. One of his first crimes, he has a long history of crimes. He had a home invasion where he kidnapped 2 women and sexually assaulted them and then held them for ransom. He was transferred to the women's prison as one of the first men to be transferred there from the law in 2021. His cellmate became pregnant. Recently, 2 years ago, he was charged with 2 counts of forcible rape within 24 hours. And also with dissuading a witness because they have him on a phone call trying to pay somebody to dissuade a witness. The trial has been delayed. Interesting why we haven't had this trial yet. Supposedly it's starting in August of 2026. In December of 2024, the court ordered the DA to refer to Carol as she. So when the DA has to describe this crime, he has to say her penis entered the woman's vagina. In court, he's being forced to say that. The Office of Inspector General's report from August 2023 surveyed 40 to 50 incarcerated women. I have to look up the exact number. A majority of these women interviewed did not feel safe with the men. More than a quarter reported negative experiences with the men. And 64%, she also interviewed the transferred men. So over half of the men that are there told her that there were others lying about being there. So the men themselves are like, yeah, there's like a lot of men here that shouldn't be here. And in fact, one of the men that's in the women's prison said, there are a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing. And that is in the state records. You can look it up. It's publicly available. I want to end with some words from the incarcerated women themselves. This is Kathleen Quinn. Her parole was revoked for complaining about a man looking at her while she was using the toilet. She says, we are women. We are locked in cells with men. Plus. Women who identify as men in the women's prison, and many of them disagree with the men being there. I guess I just want to end that I hope we can agree. We might not agree on the solution. You might not agree on the language that I'm using, but maybe you can agree. I think this is what we can all agree, is that harm has come to incarcerated women under this policy. Harm has come to incarcerated women under this policy. We cannot fix this if we refuse to see it. So let's see it, and then let's have a discussion on how to fix it.
Thanks, Jane. While we're waiting for the slides to switch over, does anybody have a question for Jane?
Don't think we right. Sorry. Thank you. We're working really hard to bring awareness to this issue. We meet with politicians regularly in California to talk about this issue. Every single prison advocacy group besides Women to Women, it's the only one. Everyone else has decided it's fine for men to be in women's prison, and they are in fact for women in prison. The incarcerated women tell us right before inspectors come in, they tell the women not to talk about it. So this is a known problem. I'm just trying to raise awareness about the issue. I think the more people know, the better. Prison is a black box. And I'm inside of a state prison multiple times a month, so I feel like I know a little bit about prisons. And just try to tell your friends, tell your neighbors. And I can provide sources like the Inspector General's report. So if people doubt you, because that's the hardest part, is it's so crazy. People say it's not happening. I said, okay, here's what we're doing. Here's the transcript from the trial. It says the judge is ordering a DA to use she or pronouns first. Make that case known. That's all I can offer. Oh, I think we only have time. Well, okay, slides are still going. Okay. So,
She had, sorry,
Oh.
she had her question.
oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. We'll have time at the end, I promise.
It's okay. I want to know which prominent Democrat female politician in California has spoken out against male murder, male rapist, male child rapist in the cells with females.
So, zero.
Zero female Democrat politicians.
Zero Democrat politicians.
Zero
I'm a lifelong Democrat, okay? I'm leaning hard. I volunteered in a state prison, okay? I spent my life funding abortion clinics. I am as progressive as you come, people. And zero Democrats have stood up for this in California.
Is anybody in this room who thinks this is a wonderful policy? Speak up.
So,
Well,
no.
No.
I don't want to be like,
I'll debate.
yeah, but I don't want to be confrontational. Like, I think, we even had a bill, so we had a bill go through committee last year for California where we asked this, we wanted to write a bill that said, okay, we can't get rid of all the men in the women's prisons, but we get rid of the male rapists in the women's prisons. So we wrote a bill.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
Yeah, we wrote a bill that said, okay, just the men that are convicted of sex offenses for women, and we get them out of the prison. And it was voted down by every Democrat in the Public Safety Committee.
Well, like every Democrat.
And I know there was one woman, I was hoping she would vote for us, she left the room and refused to vote. So that's what the state of it is right now. I don't know what to tell you, we'll get there someday, and these women are really suffering right now. It's basically state sanctioned rape, what's happening, and when they get pregnant, they have to decide, am I gonna have an abortion, or am I gonna give birth in a hospital and then say goodbye to my baby right then and go back? That's the choice you have when you get pregnant inside prison. Why are they passing out condoms to the women now? They're openly recognizing that the pregnancies are a problem. They're passing out condoms. There's massive condom distribution in this prison. Yeah, that's on record to do that. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you.
All right. I really hate following this too, but here I go. Okay, so to get started, I want to walk down memory lane a little bit and look at what the genesis of the erasure of females is. When did it begin? So trans activists are correct that cross-sex presentation has existed across many cultures for almost a century. However, they manipulate this historical fact beyond what it can bear. The history does not establish that trans identity is real, that biological sex exists on a spectrum, or that a person's brain can be different from their body. What history does establish is that sexual fetishism and the desire to normalize aberrant sexuality are not new phenomena. The intellectual lineage of what is now called transgender medicine began with Magnus Hirschfeld, a German homosexual who coined the term transvestite and developed the theory of sexual intermediaries. That's the old-fashioned term for gender identity. His work involved normalization of sexual relationships between adult men and minors. He publicly advocated for sexual relations with men and pubescent boys. Privately, he pushed normalizing sexual relations with prepubescent boys. So this man is really the godfather of trans. His close friend was Harry Benjamin, another German-born fellow, but he's a heterosexual. He was the first physician to ever inject hormones into an individual to try to affect gender identity or change somebody's so-called sex. He was the first to give a child estrogen. His experiments began right here in San Francisco in the 1940s. This explains why San Francisco is ground zero for all things trans. Wouldn't it be awesome if San Francisco was just known for their cable cars and sourdough bread? But instead, we were the birth child of really the trans movement in the United States. Benjamin ended up starting an entity called the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association in 1979. And this is the precursor to the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, also known as WPATH. WPATH purports, they call themselves the experts in all things trans. They also say they created the standards of care. They gave that name to themselves. These are not real standards of care in the law, but they have tricked judges into believing that by putting that name, remember language, the importance of language, they gave themselves the name, we are the standard of care, that they have become the standard of care just by putting that moniker into their own vernacular. And to this day, hospitals across the United States follow the WPATH standards of care created by Benjamin, who was also a proponent of sexual relations between adults and adolescents. The child that Benjamin was introduced to, the first child that he gave cross-sex hormones to was, guessed it, a young boy. And he treated him with estrogen, but the way he got introduced to this young boy was through Alfred Kinsey. Now, for those of you who don't know who Alfred Kinsey is, he did human sexuality research, despite being a zoologist with no medical background whatsoever. But he was very interested in whether young children, and when I mean young, I mean infants, were able to have orgasms. And Kinsey collected all this information. Now, where did he collect? Did he actually do these experiments? Early on, people thought that he actually experimented on infants, 2-year-olds, hour by hour, by the way, hour by hour. How many in a day? But he didn't, actually. He got his information from Rex King. Rex King is a pedophile. Rex King kept a diary, a detailed diary, where he wrote about raping 605 prepubescent boys and 231 pre-adolescent girls. He also encouraged a man who was on trial for the rape and the murder of a 10-year-old girl to continue on so that he can get more data, but to be careful. The next man who perpetuated transgenderism is the infamous John Money, who was a psychologist at Johns Hopkins. He actually invented the term gender identity and gender role. And what this notorious man did was he experimented on twin boys. The one boy, David, when he was born, had a circumcision that went awry. And his penis was cauterized off, essentially. And so John Money took advantage of this great experimental opportunity. He's got twins. He said to the parents who were desperate for help, you know, very unsophisticated parents, and said, I've got it for you. We're going to just raise David as a girl. And so we're going to dress him as a girl. We're going to force him to play with girls' toys. You're never going to tell him that he was actually a boy. And we'll keep the other twin, we'll keep him as male. And so John Money could keep, have this experiment with these two boys. John Money also took it a little bit farther, and he was trying to instill in David what it would be like to be a woman into adulthood and having sex with a man. So as children, he had David and his brother simulate sexual acts multiple times out of course, their parents' knowledge. So these two boys were subjected to horrors. And this, John Money, again, godfather to trans. Both of those boys ended up dead before the age of 40. Both really by suicide. David killed himself outright. His brother killed himself through drug overdose. So when we talk about the transgender, we have to actually keep that at the forefront of our mind. What is this movement? Who started this movement? It was started by these depraved men. You can look in history books. Again, I'm not making this stuff up. I didn't write this. It's all there. It's all there for the view. And that's how we got to where we are today. I'm not saying that all trans-identified men are rapists. I'm not saying they're all perverts. There are various pathways for trans-identified men to go down. There are men who take on a trans identity because they have shame, because they're really gay men, and they can't come to terms with that. And they have feminine attributes, and so they grow up and they're wanting to wear dresses or do things that typically girls do, and they have their teachers saying, well, might you be trans? I mean, we can look at the children's books, I Am Jazz. And it starts out with, I liked pink. This little boy liked pink. Was he really a girl? Or was he a little boy who liked pink? I'm going to venture to say he was a little boy who liked pink, who might have grown up to just be a gay man if he were left alone. And then there's the other pathway, and that is the trans AGPs, the autogynephilic men. And these are the men, probably like this fella, who get turned on at the thought of themselves as being women. So they're heterosexual, but they get a thrill. And that type of man is the most dangerous. That's the type of man who comes into our bathrooms. And then there's a third type of trans-identified males that has reared its head. And these are the new cohort, the young boys who are now being exposed to pornography. They don't think they're manly enough, or they believe that males are toxic, and they don't want to be a man, or they are using it to get closer to women because they can't really get close to them. So they can get into women's spaces. 15 more minutes. Well, 50. Okay, so I'm going to go through. I'm going to skip through my PowerPoint here. But this is what it's led to. We've got a third grader in Massachusetts with a trans-identified boy peeking through underneath the stall, peeking through the opening and watching her use the bathroom. We have girls in Maine that have just recently testified that they have boys, not just one boy, boys routinely masturbating in their bathroom. This is what this has all led to. So we went from perversion to perversion. It's where it was always going to land. And these young girls at these schools who are standing up, they are called bigots, hateful, we name it all. But they are being told that they are the problem and not the boys that are invading their spaces. So with that, I will end so that we can get through. Oh, should I ask a question? Yeah, anybody have a question? And my talk was really gross, and I apologize, but the truth hurts. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna introduce Beth Bourne. She really doesn't need any introduction. She's just on fire all the time.
Yes, so it's great to be here, and I'm fortunate. I'm probably talking about the subject that is most obvious to everybody, right? The emperor has no clothes. This was William Thomas competing in, I think that was the 500-meter freestyle event. You can see Riley Gaines there as they each got an award, but they only had one trophy. They gave it to Will or Lierre Thomas. So I've been speaking out because, like Erin, my daughter, was somebody who thought she was trans for a couple years. I got really involved in fighting back Kaiser Permanente, who tried to medicalize my daughter. And then I started showing the indoctrination in the schools. But I found, I think the idea of men and women's prisons should wake people up, but that doesn't affect your child. And you think your child's never going to come out as trans, but everyone knows a girl or their daughter, their granddaughter, their niece, and is affected by sports. So I speak about this one a lot because it's in everybody's life. But those other topics are just as important. I won't spend too much time on this, right? Men are leaner, stronger. They have better endurance systems, better reflexes, better spatial awareness. They're stronger upper body strength. They've got power, especially in something like a jumping event or a jumping event that involves jumping and then hitting, like in volleyball or basketball. It goes back to 2011. I've got it right here. WPATH colluded with the CIF to pass this gender identity policies. Originally, and most people don't know this, if a boy wanted to compete in girls' sports because he was trans identified, they were going to have a panel with 5 people, including somebody, a physician from WPATH, a psychiatrist, somebody at the school superintendent, an advocate on gender identity. It was going to be a panel with 5 people. They were going to review the student's situation. That never happened. You can see right here, right now, it just says, this is all it says about what a boy can do or a girl competing in the opposite sex sports. It just says it's up to whatever they want, regardless of what's on the student's records. You can self-identify. And then in 2021, they came up with a gender inclusivity toolkit during the COVID lockdown. You can see they basically took it verbatim from Washington State. There's a trans activist up there, and they just adopted the same toolkit. And this toolkit, so it doesn't require a public hearing or review. It just says that the student gets to pick which bathroom, locker room, what sport they want to play. So they can play on girls' volleyball in the fall and the boys, golf team in the spring. If they're non-binary, they can use whichever locker room they feel more comfortable in that day. They can go back and forth. The child decides everything. They don't even have to let their parents know what they're doing. It's completely all self-ID. You don't have to tell the other coaches. You don't have to tell the other teachers at the school. It's all considered like the privacy of the child. So the girls on the team won't know there's a boy who's, and right now in California, we have many boys who have not gone through puberty because they've been on puberty blockers and then estrogen. So it's harder to tell because you can't, tell by their exterior appearance. Anyways, it just says they can pick which bathroom or locker room they want. Many of us were at some of these events back in, I think it's 2023. You can see the girl, how upset she is that boy, his name is Athena Ryan. That's his, the name he picked. He ended up getting second, so she didn't get to go on to the state finals. You think that would be enough for people to wake up? This is just from 2 weeks ago. I did some research on Instagram and letting people know that we have, besides Abraham Hernandez down in the southern section, we also had this boy, his name is Antonio, Alice Burrietta out of Santa Maria. I put this on Instagram and I got a call from another parent notifying me that there was another boy in San Diego competing that same weekend. And this is the prelims leading up to the state championship. His name is Cole. He goes to San Diego High School. He was setting school records as a sophomore. How amazing. A sophomore setting records in the girls 400 meter. The night before the meet, he did drop out. And I think, he realized that there'd be a lot of eyes watching. We don't know how many athletes are around the state doing this because there's no records. CIF says they don't track it. Your school doesn't track it. So when I found out about this boy, Antonio Alice Burrietta, I went and watched him race, and I noticed his coach had him use the boys' bathroom, which is interesting. He had him use the boys' bathroom, and then he had him compete in the girls' 800. And I called out the coach on that. You're lying to that child, right? It's either he's a boy or a girl. But I spoke to the reporter, and they wrote this story a few days later. This is, I think, last week. Santa Maria High School transgender track competitor runs strong on conviction, right? So that's Antonio. These are pictures of A.B. Hernandez before we outed him, right? They would just put him right on the top of the podium. You could see the girls and their disappointment. And this is A.B. Hernandez this season. He's really showing his feminine side. He's got the ponytails, the ribbon in the hair, the nails done. One of his journalists said it's basically CIF is orchestrating a drag show, right? This is a drag show that everyone is having to participate in. And we all know, like Amy said, we all know that this is a male. You can see by his, the geometry of his hips and his knees and how lean he is. And the way he jumps, right? The guy jumped 43 feet. He's like set the records at his school for the section. He also he high jumped. He was the only competitor to try to break 6 feet last week at the state championship. So he did. He won 2 state championships, high jump and triple jump, and then got second in the long jump. And what CIF has done to make it more fair, right, is they have these dual medals. So they put the 2 kids, the girl who really won, and then they put the boy next to her. And this is gaslighting everybody in that stadium, right? I mean, that was that girl's one chance to be on the top, on the first place on the podium. And she had to share it with a boy. This is my high school. There were 3 boys competing in girls' sports at Davis High School while my daughter was there. And I should mention my daughter was a fantastic athlete in triple jump and the shot put. And what do trans boys do when they get to high school? They drop out of sports. She went from being a top athlete as an 8th grader, almost setting the school record, to somebody who wasn't even going to be at the bottom of JV. So she drops out of sports. So that's how it hurts the girls, besides all the other stuff. We all know Henry Hanlon. We watched him compete up in San Francisco. He scored 1/3 of the points of his team. He's 6'3" or 6'4". Look at his wingspan. I don't know. He didn't change his name. He went by Henry. And then here's another example. Which one's this? Oh, so we have seen teams forfeiting rather than play against. This is A.B. Hernandez, I think. This is a Muslim team, mostly Muslim. a public school. They said that wasn't safe. They didn't want to do it. I think there were 9 teams that said we're not going to play against A.B. Hernandez, for safety reasons. These are just some of the organizations. One of the things we get is why aren't more girls just not showing up to compete? And I know, and we all know, speaking out, what it means. You lose your friends. You're going to risk getting expelled from school. You're going to risk colleges not picking you up. There goes your scholarship. There goes your chance to even compete in sports. It's really a hard thing to ask girls to do. And I don't know why the coaches and the athletic directors and the officials, why aren't they speaking out? Why aren't they not showing up because they know it's wrong? And I think that's it, right? We all know this one is wrong.
Okay, so we have about 10 more minutes in this room. So what we're going to do is, thank you, Beth, so much first, is open up to questions. You can ask any panelists if you have any questions, any comments. Feel free, this is going to be an open space.
Okay, so it looks to me that not being a stupid, not being an idiot, not being a naive 10 years old, what you described is a classical power grab. It's an absolutely classical scenario. Someone, something, some clique, some party, some group uses this as a useful tool, one of many useful tools to grab power. So basically, we can talk about pretty much ongoing revolution, taking over. And so we can say bye-bye democracy right now. If this is not stopped in the close 10 years, this is it.
So thank you for that comment. There's a close results tear that says if you make people believe absurdities, you can make them commit atrocities. And we are in the atrocity stage. And you are absolutely correct. This is a gift to destroy families, to destroy reality, to destroy children's sexual function. The transgender movement is all about destruction. It's destruction of human race. And you're right, how better to take over a country by creating division, blowing up families, and sterilizing a generation of children. I'm going to take a question.
Erin, can you talk to us about the groups within California that have solidified around the transgender movement in our public schools?
I'll be here all day. I mean, there's so many groups. There's the HRC, there's Equality California, there's trans families, there's trans. There's so many groups because also there's money to be made. So this is very much when you look at what happened in Minnesota with the Somali fraud, we have the same thing here with the trans. So we have tons of nonprofits, and if anybody ever wants to do some research or go down the rabbit hole with me, I'm always looking for people to research. But I just tied one guy. His name is Bambi. Bambi is tied to like 6 different bills. He runs the Hate Commission. He's one of the people on the Hate Commission that doles out almost $1 billion. Well, where do you think that $1 billion goes? Goes right back to his nonprofits or his friends of his nonprofits. And where does that money go? Goes back to the politician. So there's a huge amount of money that is flowing and using this as the avenue to nonprofits and people who normally probably would not be able to be employed, but it bounces back to the politicians. And that's why we have feckless politicians, both on the right and the left, mind you. It's not just the left. I've been in Sacramento for 5 years going up back and forth. I've had Democrats say in private conversations, I'm with you, but I can't talk about this because I'll lose my seat. I've had Republicans say that. Keep coming up, but I'm not going to say anything. So they are silent because they're feckless and they're spineless because it is a cabal and it is a massive money-making enterprise that they have to keep going because everybody has their hand out. You look at anything that has caused disruption in civilization, there are always two factors: money and sex. Not them here.
Do you see any societal trends? How does, go with regular people? I think most they are not fully aware what's going on, right? Or maybe they becoming aware, but is it going to be worse or maybe better?
Well, I think, I love that you use the term regular, thank you. But when we look at the regular people, we have the polling with the sports. It's an 80-20 issue. Both Democrat and Republican, independent, they know sports is so easy, right? Boys should not be competing with girls. That's an 80-20, probably more like 9-10. Same with gender interventions on children. The polling again is against chopping off little girls' body parts, pumping them with cross-sex hormones, harming, sterilizing young boys. But it's not reaching to the politicians. There's still too much money, but I think the number of people that are now understanding how pervasive and terrible this is starting to increase. We need them to talk. We need them to just show up. We need them to get involved. Drinking your wine over the dinner table and shaking your head and saying this is horrible is step number one, but it's not going to get us across the finish line.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, with the library's, meeting room policy, we have to end at 4:30, so we have to wait for folks to clear out that
Okay.
their meeting goes at 5. So if you can do like 1 or 2 more questions and then wrap things up, and then once you're done, I'll make a quick announcement.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, go
So
And ask any of the panelists, that need to be.
try to be quick. My number one question is about judicial system because I read about current detransitioner cases and but it takes so long. The case of Chloe Cole, I thought it's going to be in April, not this year, next year. So why it takes so long when it is merit-based and it is urgent? And another question, which is part of this question, it is very hard for my friends who suffered from these atrocities, whose daughter was taken away just because, and it was actually, what's the word, confirmed that the only thing that they did wrong was they refused to affirm, they refused to medicalize the child. That was enough to take this girl from parents. And these people cannot find a lawyer. How wild is this? This girl, she was taken when she was 15, now she's 17, and she's on psychotropic medications. Every day, these parents have to endure this horrific torture. What's going on with this kid? And nobody can do anything. How horrific is this?
Yeah.
Well, I wrote a federal bill with some other lawyers that hopefully will see the light of day to address that issue. But we are addressing that issue. The use of child welfare agencies to take children away from loving parents who believe in biological reality. I had Child Protective Services show up at my house. The school called when I wouldn't call my daughter a male name, I think because I have an ESQ at the end of my name, that they went merrily on their way. But I knew then I was in a lot of trouble. They were going to take my child because I was saying I birthed a female and she is still female. One last question.
Is there any organization currently to get this exposure of the bills, the assembly bills that have been passed by Scott Wiener? Because now that he has won the primary, is there any active groups, movements, protests to expose
There's,
his A&P bills to the public?
there's tons, there's tons. The problem is that the media is bought and sold. And so I've been interviewed by the New York Times. They never published one word that I said. Finally, they did after 4 years, 5 years. They call me and get clips from me and then they don't publish. Same with CPS. Same problem with KQED. I'm sure they're gonna write a glowing piece. I'm sure they're gonna clip everything that I said and like,
Can I just, it's very interesting that they didn't come in here to actually
No,
see what the
they never will.
presentation- How can you be a reporter?
Yep.
And report from outside the protest and not come in and at least report on what's happening here and you can still be naked? For 20 years, people.
I know, we were all just a Democrat for 30 years. I mean, embarrassed. I donated to Southern Poverty Law Group. The shame, the shame. Anyway, maybe the Democrat Party is something totally different. At least I have to. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you so much.
Hey, everyone, I'm Derek Wolfram. I work for the city. I just wanted to make available to you, obviously, everybody going down that elevator will take a very long time. This door does go